Night story. In the late 90s, I lived with my dad, my younger brother, and an uncle in a small rural settlement, Vereda, in the Sierra Nevada mountains on the Guajira side. I won't specify place names to protect our identity, since what I'm about to tell you is delicate and completely true. We had arrived there about 10 years prior. The four of us worked on a small plot of land with coffee that my dad sold in the towns down the road. We were doing very well with that, but by that time, things were getting critical with the appearance of armed groups all over that area. And as always, us regular folks were caught in the middle of the disputes over land, roads, and crops. Where we were was up the road from a farm owned by a very wealthy man. It was the biggest farm around there. The man practically had a battalion of armed men who patrolled the roads, making sure no one messed with their boss's farm. Those guys were scary. You'd always see them with their faces covered, wearing caps, long-sleeved shirts, and carrying a rifle. Every so often, a dead body would appear on the road, someone accused of working with the other armed group that the landowners had declared their enemies. In town, nobody knew anything about that. They had never messed with us. But once, a rumor spread that a guy they called Matuto, who was the leader of the other group, had hidden in the settlement and that he had relatives there. That was the beginning of the anxiety for us. I remember once a man who was like the leader of the town walked through the two streets with a megaphone, shouting that if anyone was hiding Matuto, we should hand him over. He was escorted by 3 armed men with watchful eyes who would approach house windows and check that there was nothing suspicious. However, they didn't find anything and no one came forward to say anything useful to them either. For the next 3 days, a terrifying silence reigned over the place because the order was to clean out anyone connected to that man. The atmosphere was so heavy that you didn't even see dogs in the streets. The terror began on the morning of the 4th day after that. My dad and my uncle had gone down that morning with a mule to buy food and collect some money. They told us not to go out into the street or onto the porch, that the situation was no joke. Obedient, we barred all the entrances to the house and stayed in the room playing dominoes. It was around 11 in the morning when the first gunshot rang out. Then another and another. They sounded far up the mountain. Even so, we got nervous. My brother and I fell silent, carefully put everything away, and hid under my dad's bed, which was against the left side of the house. It was a concrete wall that faced the pig pen on the outside. Since it was solid concrete, it was basically a shield. My dad had told us that if anything happened, under that bed we would be safe. The minutes passed constantly. The shots sounded closer. Soon it wasn't just shots but also screams, until we started to feel the bullets hitting the wooden window planks like terrifying zips that slammed into them with all their force. We thought they were going to kill us. Suddenly, everything fell into a silence, and a smell of blood and gunpowder seeped into the entire house. I was covering my little brother's mouth. By that point, he was so scared you could see on his face he wanted to scream. I was also trembling with fear, but I knew we had to stay there in silence to protect our lives. Suddenly, a crash near us made our hearts race. They had broken down the back door of the house. We felt what sounded like a bloodthirsty and furious animal crashing against the wooden planks and pots. Then something fell to the dirt floor with a dry thud, as if they had knocked down someone's enormous body. Then the previous silence returned, interrupted every 5 minutes by voices of men passing by in the street, shouting, "Find him! Find him! He has to be hiding!" I don't know how long we stayed under the bed. They were the longest hours of my life. When it started to get dark, everything in the town calmed down, and mysteriously, a tremendous downpour suddenly began to fall, seeming like it wanted to knock the houses down. That's when we dared to come out. We had to secure the tools in the yard. But just as we left my dad's room, that unbearable smell of blood and gunpowder hit us again. I grabbed a kerosene lantern we had in the living room, lit it to see, and saw that the patio door had indeed been completely broken down. The water had flooded into the kitchen and was spreading into the living room, mixed with mud and blood. I looked out to see if I could cover the entrance, and that's when I saw him. The guy was leaning against the gas cylinder. He was a very tall, white man, dressed in camouflage and black boots. His head was hanging to one side. The most shocking thing was that the left half of his neck had been torn away. You could see a huge hole from which blood was still pouring out, as if the wound had just been inflicted. His eyes were open but whitish. They gave the impression of vibrating. His hands were extended, palms up, resting on his legs. In one of them, the left, there were some dog tags like the military uses, which I found odd because this fat, fair-skinned guy didn't look like a soldier. The tags said clearly in an engraving that looked more like it was done by hand with the tip of a nail, Matuto. Even though, given the severity of the wound, there was no doubt he was dead, it felt like he was still there, listening to everything around him. The first thing I thought, in my dismay, was that if they found him there, we would be in trouble. So I found a burlap sack and tied it around his head and chest. I told my brother to cover his eyes with a sweater so he wouldn't see that horror and to help me drag him through the yard. I propped him up on a plank and with a rope, I pulled him to a cliff we had nearby that dropped into a stream. The drop was about 50 meters. From there, I just pushed him over. I only heard the body rolling through the brush until it finally crashed against the rocks and water. As best we could, we cleaned everything, dried the house, and boarded up the door so no more water would get in. But the smell of blood was still there all over the place. My dad and my uncle arrived the next day at noon, alone, without the mule, without food, and without money. They had been robbed on the road and interrogated, asked about some guys and about that Matuto character. We told them what had happened in the town, but we didn't tell them about the guy because we were afraid that maybe what we did was wrong and that it would cause them to hurt us. The days passed, and in the town, everything had changed radically. Those guys who guarded the farms were always seen around, doing patrols. One day they messed with a young girl from the town, and her father tried to confront the man, and he shot him right in front of his house. After that, people from the town began to leave, abandoning everything. My dad, however, held out hope that things would calm down. Meanwhile, I began to live one of the most traumatic and terrifying episodes of my life. Since that time I threw the guy into the stream, I felt that everything near me smelled like blood. It was unbearable. Sometimes I was eating, and while chewing, I felt the putrid taste in my mouth as if I were swallowing some rotting animal. Nightmares were also frequent, where I saw the dead guy following me. I would wake up agitated and would still see the man there, standing by my bed with his head hanging, and although he had no eyes, I felt his gaze. I would cover myself from head to toe and stay awake with that presence there until dawn. One early morning when I didn't have nightmares because a neighbor had given me something to help me sleep, I woke up because I felt the dogs were restless in the yard. I heard them barking and scratching at the door as if something was harassing them. I got up with the lantern, and I still remember when I shone the light outside in the yard and saw, on the ground, that guy's head looking at me. I don't even know what I felt. I thought it was hallucinations, but from how the dogs were, all three pressed against the wall, looking where I saw the head and growling, I realized it wasn't just me. Besides, a fetid and terrifying presence overflowed the place, making me want to vomit from fear. I ran to wake up my dad, telling him there was a man's head in the yard. You can imagine his shock. He got up scared, running, but when he got to the yard there was nothing. But the dogs were still scared, hiding under the wash basin. Dad grabbed me, hugged me hard, stroked my head, and with a sad voice said, "We have to leave here, son. We have to leave this town." I hugged him too, and we went back to sleep. Not even half an hour passed when they knocked down our door. Matuto's group had taken over the town. That was a horrible morning. Many there were accused of collaborating with us, the other side. By the time they got to our house, they had already killed 2 neighbors in the middle of the town. They caught both of them, put a sack over their heads after they were dead, and threw them into the stream. It was like a kind of revenge. They knew something. My anguish was immense. They were going house by house looking for someone. We were the last ones. They were looking for me. I felt it. As soon as we heard the footsteps approaching the door, they didn't even knock. One kick and the hook holding the wooden plank flew across the room. There were 3 guys in camouflage just like the one I had seen before. Their faces were covered with a bandana, and one of them had a sling on his left arm and a rag tied around his neck. He was tall, bearded, and fat like Matuto. This was the one who approached and pointed at me with his right hand, signaling for them to grab me. I tried to run, but there was already another armed guy at the back door. They held my dad, my uncle, and my little brother at gunpoint while they dragged me away with a sack over my head. I don't know for how long. I only know that when they stopped, we were on the bank of the stream but quite far from my house. Suddenly, one of them put his hand on my shoulder and leaned in close. "Do you remember me?" he asked. That's when I smelled that smell of blood and gunpowder from before again. I don't know why, but I had a feeling the one talking to me was that Matuto. However, I told myself it can't be. That guy is alive? His head was practically falling off. The guy was standing in front of me, and I could hear the other 2 behind me murmuring things. Suddenly, one of them hit me hard on the legs and I fell to my knees in the mud. I heard the sound of a weapon being cocked, and the guy in front took 2 steps forward and put the barrel against my head. "Take the sack off," he said. "I want him to see me." Right at that moment, a shot rang out near the place, but it wasn't at me, it was at one of them. They immediately started shouting, "Find him! Where is he? Who is it?" I don't know what those guys saw, but I just heard footsteps running away and shouting curses. What was that? What was that? In that instant, the smell of blood was more intense and seeped through the threads of the sack, making me gag. I remained on my knees, my vision covered, not understanding what was happening, resigned to my imminent death. But nothing happened. I felt a presence nearby but couldn't decipher what it was. I stayed like that for about 2 hours, believing the guys were still nearby, discussing what to do with me. At one point, I told myself, if I have no way to save myself, I have nothing to lose by trying to escape. So I took the sack off my head, stood up, and just as I was about to run, an old man came out of the bushes, grabbed my arm and covered my mouth. I tried to struggle to break free, but he told me to calm down, that he was helping me. I recognized him then. He was an old man who lived across the hill past the stream, about half an hour from the town. People said he was a witch doctor. The old man pointed insistently to where I had been kneeling. There was a huge puddle of blood, and inside it, something was moving like a dying animal, but I couldn't make out its shape. It was just a mass whose body bubbled and shuddered in the mud. "Do you know what that was that wanted to kill you?" the old man asked me. "That is a satanic invocation. That is a demon," he told me. The men who were with him didn't know anything either. That's why, as soon as they saw it materialize when I shot him in the left ankle with a crossed bullet, a special type, they ran away scared. That is a dead man who made a pact. You have to leave here because he will keep looking for you. I returned home about 2 days later when I found out everything had calmed down and the army had arrived in the town. But the rumors going around were that they had confronted Matuto and other men down by the stream. Some said the army had killed him, but that they hadn't found the body. The soldiers said they hit him several times, that they saw him, that the guy didn't seem human, that he didn't even have eyes. We found out they found him about a month later. The head was buried on the bank of the stream where they had held me, and the body was up the stream by the cliff, near where we had our plot of land. We left there a week after what happened to me with a group of neighbors helped by the soldiers. For us, that meant losing everything and starting over. I had nightmares for about 10 years that would make me jump out of bed running because I felt a rough hand covering my mouth. My life calmed down when I got married. My wife had me devote myself to the church. That was an even stranger episode because I remember the priest was baptizing me when he suddenly fell silent, as if he were choking, and ordered the church doors closed. He put his hand on my head and said a prayer in which he basically asked God to reclaim my soul. My body was trembling. I began to have visions of that guy. I saw his swollen, eyeless face everywhere in the church, until suddenly I felt an enormous relief in my chest, as if something that had been tormenting me from the inside was being torn out. That was when, for the first time in many years, I was able to smell the real scent of things again because for me, everything had smelled rotten, of death and blood.